All right, so another cool episode. We've been all over the place. We're going down to Dallas right now. We've had the young ones, we've had the old ones, and we're bringing you Kevin Kruse, who's in clinical practice now for 6 years. This dude is all in. I mean, he is a real go-getter. He has an amazing practice. Not only does he have an amazing practice, but he can actually discuss exactly how he developed that practice so well that he wrote a book. Once again, the Fro has no book, but we're going to have to work on that. But the bottom line is Dr. Hustle is his book, and it really talks about efficiency, tracking outcomes, how you can have a great professional life as well as a great quality of life. So I think it's great wisdom for young and old who are going to read that book. We also talk about medical device design, which he's been involved in as well, really developing his own rotator cuff tool, which I think is really cool. I'm hoping that he gets that across the finish line as well. Fun episode, great guy. I'm always amazed at how much people are doing. Even at 6 years into practice, he's on a great trajectory. Love the episode. You will too. We continue to thank our sponsor, Ortho Laser Orthopedic Laser Centers. They continue to offer MLS M8 technology for chronic and acute orthopedic pain as an alternative source to opioids and possibly even avoiding surgery. The franchises continue to spread across the country. It's an amazing opportunity for orthopedic surgeons and doctors and even medical device reps to become part of the growing technology. Ortho Laser Milwaukee and Ortho Laser Rochester just opened. We have another 5 in the queue. Come and join the Ortho Laser franchise family. Hashtag follow the Fro.
From Medical Media, this is The Ortho Show.
Hello world, Dr. Scott Sigmund, your favorite opioid-sparing orthopedic surgeon here for another episode of the Ortho Show podcast, where we bring you the best of the best in the orthopedic world. And again, we have no exception to that rule. We have Dr. Kevin Kruse, who's joining us today, who's an orthopedic surgeon down in Dallas, Texas. I think that's the first time we're making the trip down to Big D. He's an upper extremity specialist, shoulder, elbow, and hand. Born and bred in Indiana, and we're going to talk about your football time at the Indiana University for sure. Did his residency down in Greenville, South Carolina at the Stephen Hawkins Clinic, fellowship at the University of Pittsburgh, where we've got some friends there as well. And then I'm really excited to talk about the time you spent in France. As you know, I've done a little bit of that too with Gilles Walch. So as well, it is a pleasure to have you on, Kev. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much, Scott, for having me on. I think you've got an awesome podcast. I've listened to a lot of your episodes, and flattered that you would have someone like me on here, dude.
No, man, you got some interesting stuff. I'm excited to talk to you. You know, we're really having a real good time with this thing. I got to tell you, we've got our exciting Pitch Pro episodes that are coming on too, which I want everybody to know about, which is sort of a Shark Tank thing that we're doing within the orthopedic world with medical device and with pharma companies. We've already shot our first 3. We're really excited about that. All right, so man, listen, we like to talk our stories, man. We want to hear about what you're all about, where you came from, how you did this whole orthopedic stuff. So you're born and bred in Indiana. Tell us about your life in Indiana.
Yeah, so I grew up in Indianapolis, small suburb north of the city, Carmel, Indiana. My dad was an internal medicine doctor. That kind of got me interested in medicine, and just grew up playing sports and just messing around with friends, and played basketball, but gravitated more towards football in high school, and then ended up walking on and playing at Indiana University. And I lived in Indianapolis for 26 years of my life, and I always thought I was going to go back there and practice. I had a pretty good gig set up with a group there. When I was a resident in South Carolina, my wife's family actually ended up moving away to Denver, and when her family moved, it was kind of like I kind of got opened up to other possibilities. And so that's kind of how I ended up in Dallas. Is she kind of turned me into a free bird, and she's like, do we really have to go back there if my parents don't live there and my family's not there? And I'm like, all right, we can look at some other cities. And it's interesting. I trained with a bunch of guys in Greenville that were UT Southwestern guys, because there's kind of a connection between UT Southwestern and Vail. So ended up in Dallas. But no, I loved growing up in Indiana, man. I have nothing but great things to say about it. And we're going back here in a couple of weeks to go to the race. It's going to be a good time.
Yeah, when's that? Memorial Day weekend? Is that when the race is
Always
every year?
Memorial Day weekend. Yep.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, dude, come on. You just like skip over this whole walking on playing for Indiana football. You were an all academic Big Ten. I mean, that must have been pretty crazy, huh?
It was good, I mean, it was funny because I would say I was a slightly above a high school football player. And if you look at me physically, when people say, "Oh, you played football in Indiana," I'm like, well, I lost like 40 pounds when I stopped playing. But, I was a walk-on linebacker. I sent in my video. I had a couple of good games when I was a senior, so I got, preferred walk-on status. And then I came in and it was good. We were terrible. And I was, an okay player on the team, but I tell people, that experience shaped me so much as a human being because it taught me, number one, like you just go for it, right? Like you take a risk, and you have all these guys that always say like, "Oh, I should walk on," and they don't want to do it because they're afraid they're going to fail. And like by all means, you could look at my experience, and I was a failure because my main goal was to earn a scholarship, but I ended up jacking up my knee when I was a sophomore. Played one more year, and then it was just done. I had this bad kind of like condylation arthritis behind my kneecap. And so, when it was all said and done, it's like, man, you put in all that time and energy and we lost all these games, but all the relationships that I built, with those people. I mean, I'm talking to a guy tomorrow, one of the guys I played with, about a medical device that I've got developing, and I've stayed friends with a lot of those people, and also just the life lessons that you learn about discipline and work ethic and time management and all those things. Like I wouldn't change it for the world, man. Like it was a great experience, and it shaped me like as a human being dramatically, and taught me a lot about just working hard and discipline. And yeah.
Yeah, no, that team approach that you learn. I played lacrosse at Tufts University and was recruited to play football, but then I took a look at the playbook and I looked at all the guys that were twice my size, and I decided I'm only going to play one sport, try to go to medical school. But I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, the things that you learn in the playing field in the locker room apply to everyday life as you move on, as to how that team approach of being able to solve problems and issues and working with people. Yeah, it's an invaluable experience, for sure. So, all right. So then, so where we got for medical school? Where do we go for medical school?
I went to IU Med School. There's only one medical school in Indiana. It's Indiana University Medical School, and there's 9 campuses there. And yeah, it's one of the biggest medical schools in the country. So if you're in state in Indiana and you don't want to pay double, you go to IU Med School. It's pretty simple as that. And one other thing I would tell you, Scott, I can't believe I kind of jumped over this. Is the other thing is just having injuries, right? Like when I was a sophomore in high school, I dislocated my elbow, fractured my medial epicondyle. That was my first surgery. Then I had compartment releases, believe it or not, for shin splints when I was a senior in high school because I had these shin splints that wouldn't go away for like 3 years. And then I had my knee scoped. I tore my labrum when I was playing football. I've had that fixed twice. So I've had all these surgeries, and the knee scope kind of did me in. That was like kind of what finished me at IU, finished my illustrious career. But it's actually nice to be able to like empathize with the athletes, when surgeries don't go well, or when you have a problem, like you have to stop playing. And like, you kind of know, like when you're telling those young athletes, like, listen, I know how you feel. Like, I know how bad this sucks to not be able to play your sport anymore because you have this injury, but like life does go on, like, and you will learn from this, and this will be a lesson for you. And also just having a bunch of surgeries and knowing what that feels like. Cause I mean, I do shoulder elbow surgery and I've had a bunch of my own. So that helped me a ton to be able to be hurt. It sucked when you're, 20, 21 years old and you're done. But, to be an adult now and be able to go back and empathize with those kids, it's great. Yeah, so I went to IU Med School, and, I, like everybody else, you just sit out, you go interview as many places as you can. And I remember I interviewed in Greenville, South Carolina, and I remember the chairman there went to the Citadel, and he recommended that I read this book from Pat Conroy. And I had already read a bunch of books by Pat Conroy anyway in high school, and it was called My Losing Season. And I went and read the book, and it's about a walk-on at I think it's the Citadel, and it's about his losing season as a walk-on. And I was just like, it just struck me. And I remember I sent him a long message and talked to him afterwards. Like, I went and read that book, and it really meant a lot to me. And we just connected. And for some reason, I just knew this chairman, this 75-year-old man from South Carolina, and he and I had this link. And I just went home and I told my wife, and I was like, I don't know why, but I feel like I'm going to end up in Greenville, South Carolina. I don't know anything about South Carolina. And boom, that's where I ended up, and it was awesome.
Yeah, that's a funny story for me too. I twisted my knee while at Tufts, and So J.R. Richmond was the team doctor at Tufts University, as we all know. He's, an iconic leader in sports medicine, one of my mentors. And so 6 years later, or whatever it was, I'm through medical school, or I'm applying for residency, and I'm sitting at this big meeting with them all there at my interview, and J.R. Richmond looks at us and says to me, "Why should I take you into the residency?" I was, "Well, you scoped my knee 6 years ago. You did really well. You might as well take me." And that was sort of broke the ice. And from there, and there I was. I went to the Tufts program and did my orthopedic residency. So stories like that, are not uncommon. It's the relationships that you build. It's those extra things that you do that really can set you apart and get you across the finish line. Getting into an orthopedic residency is difficult. We've had many guests, describing that as well. So, so you're in your residency down in South Carolina, which is beautiful, by the way. It's just great country. And then you decide hand and upper extremity. So you go to the University of Pittsburgh and you do your gig there. Who did you do your fellowship with? Who were the faculty?
So a bunch of guys. So they actually merged the fellowships, and I had an attending that I trained with. Well, Hawkins was in South Carolina when I was there, so I love shoulder stuff. Even when I was in medical school, I knew I wanted to do something with shoulders, and started residency. But it was weird. Hawkins had this thing against shoulder fellowships. Like he wanted everybody to do like sports or some sort of hybrid, and I was like, I don't want to scope knees. I want to just do upper extremities. So I had an attending who did the Allegheny Fellowship back in the late 90s or mid 90s. And this guy, he could scope a shoulder, do a beautiful rotator cuff, total shoulder, complex elbow, replant a finger, like anything in the arm. He could do it, and he was slick. And he did this fellowship. So I was like, all right, I want to go there. And they actually merged them the year was there. So it was like the Allegheny Fellowship and the UPMC. So I had like 12. It was nutty, right? Like, this is nuts. I did 12 1-month rotations as a fellow.
Wow.
So,
can you remember everybody's name?
No, I remember I got to the end of the year and I was like, I need to figure out how to do how I'm going to do a carpal tunnel, because every single month I've got to change up. So but Mark Barretts was the head of it. Mark Barretts was the director. And so Mark's a big hand elbow guy. He does a lot of the, meetings up at Anna, at the OLC. And then Joe Imbriglia was the guy who started all the fellowships in Pittsburgh way back in the day. And Joe Imbriglia actually was he was a resident in Columbia when Dr. Neer was there, like in 1973. He was the first hand surgeon in Pittsburgh, but he was an amazing guy. This guy, even at like 73, he would see like 60 or 70 people in a day, and we would get done at like 3:00, and it just felt easy. Like, he always would tell you, like, Kevin, if it doesn't feel easy, something's wrong. You got to fix it. It should always just be easy. I'm like, all right, I like that. And then they had a ton of other guys, Dean Soterianos, Chris Schmidt, Tom Hughes is another guy. And then you had a lot of, I had 12 attendings. So it was a lot of people. And but it was a great year. I learned a ton.
Yeah, tremendous experience. So now, did you go to France immediately after that, or were you in private practice and then went to France? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I always knew I wanted to go to France. And I remember I went and I sat down with Hawkins when I was a second-year resident. And I was like, I want to do this hybrid thing, right? I was like, I think I want to do a hand fellowship and a shoulder fellowship, but I found this hand fellowship in Pittsburgh where they do a lot of shoulders. I don't know if I need to do like the full 2 years, but so like I'm willing to go anywhere in the whole world. Like, if you say it's the United States, I'll go somewhere for 4 to 6 months. If you say I got to go to, Antarctica, and he just like really quickly was like, you need to go to France and work with Gilles Walch. He's like, he's the best shoulder surgeon in the whole world, in my opinion. And he is probably one of my top 5 favorite people in the whole world. And so he made a couple calls. And in France, it's real simple. It's like, we've got this guy, he wants to come be your fellow, Gilles, 4 years from now. And Gilles sends back, please come. Your spot's here. And that's it. Like, literally like 2 emails back. And then I'm like, okay, like, save my spot. And so
that's great. There's no match. You don't have to submit an application. None of the craziness.
And so this is kind of a crazy story. So we get into Pittsburgh, and I know I'm going to go to France. My wife and I are so excited. I get to Pittsburgh, and I'm like thinking I can moonlight as a fellow. And they had this thing against moonlighting in Pittsburgh. And I remember Mark Barretts, I told him, I was like, man, I don't know how I'm going to pay for this fellowship in France, man. Like, it's going to cost me like $50,000 or $60,000. It's not funded. You guys aren't paying us jack here. I got to go moonlight. And Barrett's is like, man, you got 1 year here. I really want you to focus on this fellowship. I don't really like moonlighting. If you've got to go moonlight, do it. But he's like, this is what I propose, Kevin. He's like, how much money do you need to go to France? And I was like, I don't know, $50,000. And he was like, okay, I'll write you a check tomorrow. And then no interest. And he goes, between you and I, you pay me back whenever you get the money. And it was the most I was so blown away by the move that he had just pulled on me, because he knew that I wasn't going to take his money and that I also wasn't going to moonlight. So I went back to South Carolina for a month to work at this small hospital to get like 30 or 40,000 bucks to be able to go to France. And it was the best investment I ever made. So I was in practice for like 1 month, just doing like locums, and then went out.
And how long did you spend over there?
4 months.
4 months. Yeah. It is a pretty remarkable crew of shoulder surgeons in France, right? I mean, these guys they're just innovative in their thought process. They're not, stuck in the mud like some of us American surgeons are, where we take, decades to make changes. And it was a pleasure. I spent some time with Loren LaFosse, only for a week, but it was, it was a tremendous experience for me, and really helped to, provide me techniques and ideas that I'm doing now in clinical practice as well. But it's just to be able to go to different places. One of our guests was Andrew Wickline, and what Andrew does now, and it was really pretty remarkable and profound thing. Every year he goes and visits, another orthopedic surgeon. He literally just picks up from his practice for whatever period of time, asks his reps and says, who should I go see? Who's really good? We should do more of that. I mean, we get sort of doing our thing in our ways, but I mean, one of the things that we've learned on the Ortho Show in particular, the connections that we have internationally is really amazing. And, we've all been shut away here for the last year or so, and we're all excited to be able to come back out again and share. But, great kudos for you to be able to really think about that, do that. And I know that that's absolutely elevated your game and makes you think in different ways than what you were taught. Not that what you were taught here in the States wasn't great, because it is, but the more you learn from, right, the better you get.
100%, man. Like it is by far the best investment of time and money that I've ever made in my whole life, because it just shapes you so radically. Because I tell people, it's just like a culture, like if you take a human being and you set them away somewhere else, just like food, language, everything, it evolves in a different angle. And then you go see it, and then you all of a sudden you start thinking differently, and it totally breaks you down. Like what you thought was a certain way, or you had to do things a certain way, you realize there's a million ways to do this. And I think you don't go there to be an automaton, right? Like I didn't go there to learn to do shoulders exactly like Gilles Walch did, right? Now I still do a lot of things the way that he taught me, but it almost taught me to have just have an open mind, right? Like be willing to change and evolve and grow, because like, dude, you just did freaking, 12 years of training. And I always think like I just kept getting narrower, right? Like you do college, then medical school, then ortho, shoulder, elbow, hand, then just pure shoulder. And when you got to the very end, everything that you learned was kind of flipped upside down in terms of what you should be doing. And when we got there, he had just started, I don't know, you're more sports, you don't do much arthroplasty, right?
Correct.
Okay. So he had started this company called Imascap, and it was with a computer scientist and he and Boileau. And he had just started looking at the 3D mapping of shoulders. And so Gilles Walch started a company with like a PhD in Boileau, and they sold off bits of it to Tournier. But it literally, the month we got there was when he first started using it. And Walsh, like when you go train, and I'm sure it was like LaFosse, like it's like a revolving door of people from all around the world. Every week there's like, surgeons from Tokyo and Australia and New Zealand. I mean, it's wild, these guys. It's like, there's like, you're only allowed to have, Dr. Walsh only allows 8 people in his room at once. That was like the rule. They're like, there's only 8 people allowed here, so you guys are going to have to take turns. It was nice. It calmed down after September, but anyway.
And they give certificates too. That's what's even crazier. It's like these doctors come in from all over the world. That they spend 4 or 5 days, or maybe even just 2 days, and then they'll take that certificate and they'll hang it up on their wall back in Tokyo or wherever they're from. You got one on the wall right there. He's looking for it.
I'm going to show for mine. Because we got together 4 months, and we're like, no, they didn't give a certificate. And we're like, hey, guys, we were here for 4 months. We published like 9 papers. We were there. Like there was 3 guys that were actually true fellows. They had visitors, but the guys and the fellows meant that like you had to go to the hospital and do the constant scores and do the research. And they didn't expect much. I mean, it was pretty laid back, but like you were there working, right? And when we got done, we're like, hey, can we get like something that said we were here? And they're like, what do you want? We're like, I don't know, just like something that said we were here. And they made us this nice little plaque, and it was special. I had it hanging in my office.
That's right. That's all that matters. All right, man. That's great stuff. So let's pivot a little bit, because there's a couple of unique things that you're doing, and I'd like to be able to share them as part of your story. So I feel, Heather, I got to tell you, we're going to have to figure something out here, because every single guest that we have on this show is writing a book, and I got nothing. So I feel like I got to do something. So we're gonna have to figure that out, Heather, on the backside. But so I want to give you some street cred here, and I want to talk about your book. And I'm going to read a couple things here just as a lead in, and then we'll let you sort of take it from there. So the book is Dr. Hustle, the 9 core principles to help you build a thriving, competitive practice in today's constant changing healthcare environment. We are going to help you achieve the surgical practice of your dreams. Tell us about it.
Well, you have to write book titles like that, unfortunately, to get people to pay attention. I always kind of feel a little embarrassed when I read it. But so long story short, I got to the end of my, like 4.5 years in, when I was looking at all the numbers in our group, and I looked and I was like, the busiest guy in our group. And when I started practice, I was like everybody else. I came right into the smack middle of Dallas. So I've got, Buzz Burkhead across the street, Butch Krishnan down the street. I've got 15. Everybody's like, oh, it's so saturated. You can't get busy. And I've got 15 shoulder specialists like within 2 miles of me. And I joined this group, and I got here and I had no money. I had to borrow money from my in-laws just to like pay my rent my first month, right? Because how it is in private practice. Like, we don't pay people a lot of money to come out. Like, it's like, here's your job, son. Go make it work. Take a risk on yourself. And if you can pull it off, it's awesome because you're a free bird, right? So I put my foot on the gas pedal and just worked for 4 years. Like, worked on marketing, worked on my practice, just worked to try to build and grow. And I've got a partner of mine, Rainer, who he and I are the same age. He's a Stedman Hawkins Vail fellow. And at the end of 4 years, both of us were the number one collectors. And I mean, that's out of guys that are really well-established guys. We've got some premier orthopedic surgeons in our group. And I was like, in orthopedics, nobody's going to listen to you on the podium when you're 38, 39 years old. It takes time to build up that part of a research. I'm like, I can keep on kind of dabbling in the research projects, or I can just kind of put out what helped me grow my practice, right? Because what I know now versus 5 years ago is like this huge chasm of knowledge. And I feel like if I could just talk to myself, 5 years in the rear and tell myself these things, would have been really valuable. So I thought, I could just put this down on paper and figure it out. And I just said, hire a ghostwriter, or I dictated everything in my car. Actually, I just dictated what I thought. And then I hired a writer, and she helped me put it together. And I thought, really just for younger surgeons coming out, like fellows, first couple of years. But then like one of my partners who's like 10 years older than me, like I was like, just tell me what you think. He read it and he was like, hey, this stuff's gold. And he made some changes about being efficient in his clinic. And it's really just about how to build and grow a busy practice and manage it and leverage it, right? Like all the things going on. And there's just, it's so complicated right now, and it'll be different 5 years from now, but just trying to just what worked for me. And obviously, guys like you and mentors and clever guys that have taught me a lot of stuff. I mean, a lot of it's just things that I learned from very, very, bright, brilliant surgeons that I've worked with that I put to work, and it worked out. So I just wanted to share it.
No, and that's great. And I mean, there's some things, and I think you made a very valuable point in that, when you first assumed that you were writing this book, who was it going to be for, or the young guys first coming out? But, the world is changing around us, right? With social media, the ability to market yourself and develop a personal brand. What's your message? Do you want to be there until 7 or 8 o'clock at night? But do you still want to be busy? But how are you going to be efficient? Efficiency is the key. I'm a huge believer in the model. My professor, Michael Goldberg, used to say, as long as you keep everybody moving like you're at Disney World, everybody's happy. You just can't keep them sitting there. But I've always said that my patient's time is as valuable as mine. And if you're going to sit there and have somebody sit in a waiting room for an hour and a half and spend 10 minutes with them, they're not going to be happy. But if you have a 3:50 appointment and the patient's in the room at 3:50 and you give them quality time for that period of time, and everybody can be satisfied. So those tips and pearls, are wisdom, man. And that's important. So I don't want to give away all of the things in the book.
Give it away, man. Give it away. I give away. That book's like, I think like $1 a book.
Yeah, well, everyone's going to
$1 per book.
All right, come on, man. The Fro's telling everybody right now, you got to read this book. It's super cool. It's totally Fro approved. But having said that, let's talk about it. I mean, we just talked about efficiency. What are some of the things that set you aside and gave, because remember, it's not just about the professional life. It's also the quality of your life as well, right? You got to have time for family and the other things that are super important. So give us some of the cool things you're talking about.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, for me, I think you're exactly right. It's about efficiency, but you can't just waltz into someone's room and say, oh, you got a big rotator cuff tear. I think we should fix it, and then walk out of the room. That doesn't work, right? And you also can't spend 3 hours with every patient. Like it's not feasible financially in our world. Like there is and so that you say, okay, what's the game here? And for me, the game is, how do I continue to improve the quality of care that I'm giving, the service and the patient experience, while still becoming more efficient, right? And you can achieve those things, and we've worked on this hard for 5 years, right? Like with my PA, my MAs, everybody. And I sit down. I think that's one thing too, is you sit down with your staff and you say, what can we do better? How can we become more efficient while still delivering phenomenal quality of care? And we have like great mechanisms for reviews and stuff like that. And that's trying to be as objective as you can. But like we saw 54 today, and we got done at 2:10. And I dictated every single note in the room, and that's it. And, people look at that sometimes, like, I'm sure these guys, like one of the guys I trained with in fellowship, this guy Butterball saw 100 people a day. And some people are like, oh, that's too much. Like, that's too much. Like, you can't, it's like, well, you can't you cannot give quality care doing that, but he can. And if he couldn't, then why are there 100 people in his office? You know what I mean? Like, he's 62. Like, I mean, he's a good surgeon, and people want that. So I think it's about removing all the riffraff and removing all the extra stuff that you do in lost and wasted motion, and being focused. Like for me, it's just, you stay in the room. Like my MAs and PAs, nobody sees me in clinic because I'm literally in the room examining patients and talking to patients the whole time. And every single other little nonsensical thing that you don't need to be messing with is delegated to the staff, right? And they just have an efficient machine with communication, and it's just all about the patients. And I think you're exactly right, dude. Like, if you have someone that's been waiting for an hour and a half, because that's what happens, is you get behind, right? And then you're late, and so then you rush. But if the appointments are to the point and you're nice, you give them the time they need, you always let them tell their story. You always have to tell their story. You never interrupt them. And sometimes it's hard because it's like 10 minutes and you're like, okay, you got to hang now. But you always let them tell their story, but then everything else can be really streamlined. So you're not messing around. Like, I see like a lot of messing around with doctors in their office. And so you say, okay, and then it allows you to have a balanced life. Like, you can have, you can't do a lot of orthopedic surgery without seeing a certain volume of patients, right? Like, you say, I want to do 10 surgeries a week. Well, then you got to see 100 patients. If you want to do 20, you got to see 200. And then you say, how can I make that efficient? So then you can go home and, I pick up my kids from school and I take my kids to breakfast, and then, I play plenty of golf and do things like this. And so it allows you to have that balanced life while still being very productive. Like, that's the key to it all. And for everybody, that's the formula.
Yeah, no, and you're right. But each one of us are different, and we each run at our own pace. One of the things that I've always professed about my practice is it's all about the patient experience. I want the patient to be as comfortable as possible. I want them to be back into action as soon as possible. I don't want them waiting in my room. I want them to be comfortable. One of the things that I found was disheartening as we moved into electronic medical record was all the time in the FaceTime with the computer that we had to do with pressing buttons. So we've moved to a scribe, which is fantastic. So my scribe is in there holding the computer. I'm talking to the patient, looking to the patient in the eye. I dictate my history and my discussion in front of the patient. So I say, look, I've listened to what you've had to say, and I dictate it back to them, and they're nodding their heads. They say, he listened. That's great. And even though the entire patient experience in the room may be 7 or 8 minutes, that's enough for them to be satisfied to know that we cared. So that's great advice. Absolutely. Now, one of the other things that you talk about, you mentioned the great reviews, and I think reviews are really important for people to know who you are. And we advise that, you encourage that sort of a behavior pattern from your patients if you can, especially, the happy ones, but you also are tracking outcomes. So talk to us about, because I think that's important too, right? People need to know that what you're doing works and that people are happy.
100%. So I used SOS from the day I started. I think everybody should track that. And number one, the beautiful thing about tracking your outcomes is, number one, like, you get an objective measure for what you're doing. Like, and there's so many tools to do this, and it takes so little time as a surgeon right now. Like, my scheduler, when she schedules a surgery, she puts them into the system, right? So I could literally do nothing, and all of it's already being tracked with ASCS scores. Now, I do go into the system and I update the surgeries, and the more data that you put in there, the more you can get out of it, right? But these databases, like, for instance, Arthritis SOS, it is an insane gold mine of information, man. Like, I don't feel like anybody really understands what that is. I think some people are like, oh, wow, it's Arthrex. But whatever you want to do, there's Ober, there's a million of them out there, and they're super easy to use. It's totally no-brainer.
So one of the other things, that you're doing, and I know your own experience because you and I had a conversation about this offline, is medical device design. And,
Yep.
it's a trying process. It's not easy to be able to come up. I mean, I can tell you, I've got two patents, Mom. I worked really hard. I did good, but those patents are never going to see the light of day. I mean, I did that with a major corporation. We did it together, and the timing wasn't right for them to be able to move on it. And so I think that you just give us a couple minutes about maybe the process. You don't have to sort of give up everything, but tell us a little bit about what your product is and the process of trying to make that commercialized so that it actually comes out and can be used.
Yeah, so I think it all starts with trying to solve a problem that you have. Like just like anything, you say, okay, I've got this thing that I want to make better, or this problem that I want to solve, and then you go from there and you start looking and seeing if there's anything out there, and then you like once you get deep into this space, like once we get more narrow focused, you have a better idea of what's going on in the world when you go to all the meetings and you talk to all the people in industry and all that stuff. So for me, it really was simple. Like when I came out in practice, I use anchors and arthroscopic bone tunnels, right? And I want to be a value-based surgeon. That's why I use ultrasound. That's why I use bone tunnels a lot. That's why I do when I do hand surgery, I do wide awake local anesthetic with no anesthesia, all those things. Because to me, the future is lean, clean, and just removing riffraff from our system, right? It's like getting great outcomes, low cost, but high efficiency, all that stuff. So I love arthroscopic bone tunnels, and there's a reusable device by a guy, I'll give a shout out to Brett Sanders, who has an awesome device that's reusable. So you don't have to use anchors for rotator cuffs, which is beautiful. And so, but when I was doing it, you have to tie knots, right? And so I like the knotless repairs that are like kind of the fad or the things that have been going on in the last 5 to 10 years, because it's just slicker and faster. And so I'm sitting there tying these knots. And when you get a big cuff repair, like I've done 4 tunnel repairs before with 4 or 5 pieces of suture through each one. So I'm tying 20 knots, right? And that takes a long time, right? Even if you're a fast knot tire. So I'm like, man, I really wish that there's just a way for me to link these sutures together, right? And then when I do my sutures on the medial row, I like all suture anchors, right? Because I like the small footprint. They work great. There's good outcome data on them now. And so I thought, well, wouldn't it be amazing to be able to do a double row repair with an all suture anchor, right? Where you have it as both the lateral and the medial row, and also be able to do a bone tunnel very quickly by having a device that linked them. And so that's where it came from. And I went to a lot of the companies, and they were just kind of like, yeah, I kind of went back and forth. And then I found an engineer who was interested in it. And basically we just developed it together for the last 3 years. And now we have a product that's basically a little clip linking device. And we've got patents and all these things on it. So I feel like I can talk about it. That links the medial and lateral row together. So it allows you to do a bone tunnel efficiently. So you get the value-based surgery, but you get the efficiency side. And then you get the ability to do a double row all suture anchor repair as well. And we're pretty excited about it. We'll be submitting to the FDA here probably in the next month or so. But then you're right. Like the hard part is just the money, like how much money it costs to do this and the time and the regulatory. And then you're going up against these big behemoths, these $5-6 billion machines that you're going against. But if you're passionate about it and you really believe in it and you really want it, like the number one reason why I made this thing, dude, is because I want to use it like in surgery, like for myself. And I think that maybe other surgeons would feel the same way, but it's not easy, man. Like we're 3 years in and we're just submitting to the FDA. And if you saw this, you would look at it and be like, really? That takes 3 years to make? But it's not.
No, I get it. And, that's why a lot of, surgeon designers choose to not take the hard path. I mean, yours is the hard path. You've developed this thing, you've found an engineer, you've gotten your patents, and now you're going to the FDA and you're doing this all on your own. And what a lot of other surgeons will do with the really cool new ideas, they'll go to one of these larger orthopedic device companies and say, can we do this together, right? They then absorb the cost. The problem is you lose the autonomy, and then perhaps your project never gets off the ground as it was for me. So I think that's a great lesson, for our listeners and the young docs out there that are coming up with cool new ideas. You can persevere, you can succeed, and you're going to do this. And then, hopefully it becomes a product that somebody will look at and say, oh yeah, we actually need to buy this. And then it'll be worthwhile and it can spread and you can share with others as well. So definitely a great part of the story for sure.
A part of my a guy in Dallas. I know he's Dan Worrell. He's a really bright guy. He developed Biomet's distal bicep system and some other things too. And he and I, we like to hang out and play golf a lot. And we have this like dream of starting this company together where, it's surgeon-led innovation, a company led by surgeons for surgeons. And what you do is you bring surgeons on board and you've got to get a little skin in the game. But really it's surgeon-led innovation. And what we're trying to do is empower surgeons to bring their ideas to the table and streamline the process. And the world's getting faster and smaller, and little guys can do bigger things quicker now because everything's so connected, right? That I think that that's going to be part of the future, because when you get these big machines, it's not just about like what product makes sense. It's what's good for the shareholders, what's good for this thing that we've got going, this massive machine that's moving this direction. Like, we can't just make a new anchor, bud. We've got $500 million into this one. It's not that simple. And so you can be a little small guy sometimes and make things go. And I think in the next 10 to 15 years, I think you're going to see more surgeon entrepreneurs having more ideas.
Oh, I completely agree with that. And one of my favorite sayings is like, you can't build an airplane without having a pilot, around to make sure it's going to fly. So, engineers and surgeons working together simultaneously on projects really is what brings out the best results for sure. Hey, Kev, man, this was awesome. We really appreciate your time. This is what we do here on the Ortho Show podcast. We bring you unique orthopedic surgeons that are trying to make a difference on the planet with the time they have. And, I love your efficiency, your model of practice, your concern about patient outcomes and the patient experience, also coming up with new ideas for orthopedic surgeons to be able to use in practice and surgical techniques as well. So you've been an outstanding guest, Kev. We really appreciate you having you on today.
Thanks a lot, Scott. It's been awesome. I remember when I initially talked to you, I looked up online, I saw you did arthroscopic ladder J's, and I was like, oh, this guy's the real deal. So I give you much respect for being one of the few guys in America. And then you kind of put me into this pot of, I didn't realize all these guys in America doing that, but no, man, you got an awesome podcast. I think you're doing great stuff. I love your show, and thanks for having me on, man.
No, appreciate you. This is Dr. Scott Sigmund, #FollowTheFro, host of the Ortho Show. Till next time.